Hi, we continue in Genesis 21 with the return of Abimelech for another encounter with Abraham. And as I noted in the introduction video to these two chapters of Genesis 20 and 21, if we aren't paying close attention to how these pieces fit together, when we get to this section here, which we can see in the blue part down here on the right side of the screen, this seems to come out of nowhere and have nothing to do with what either goes before, the horrific scene of the casting out of Hagar and Ishmael, or what follows, an equally horrific scene of the binding of Isaac. Why would the author or the editor or whoever put this seemingly dry story about a covenant around a well in between these two poignant stories about the children that they've been waiting for literally for 25 years or more? Well, the only way to understand it is to use the work that I tried to lay out in the introductory video from people like Megan Warner and a number of others who recognized that, contrary to older scholars who saw all of Genesis and much of the Bible as a pastiche of edited pieces that are only weakly woven together, reading it as a tight unit shows how tightly this all fits together. And I've been trying to show that not only in the introductory video, but in each element as we see. So as we get to verse 22 here, and you see on the left side of the screen, we're not only continuing this scene here, but we're doing it in the light of everything that's happened, and that will make sense as we go. And so I'm hoping that you'll see that this scene, if not in today's video and the next one that finishes this scene, shows how everything fits together, and the scene about Abraham and Abimelech here is as much about Isaac as anything else, even though he's not mentioned out loud. So to help do that, I put up one more time the chiasm that holds these two stories together I've been showing throughout the last scenes. And as we look at this immediate passage, it forms its own chiasm. I've not seen scholars note this chiasm, but there you can see it. And unlike most of them that are either ABA, a number of little ones we saw last time, and there's another little one in this passage like that, and the usual form of ABCBA, here we have a much more detailed one in a relatively short period of time. That's an unusual construction. But you can see it there, the parallels on the purple parts at the beginning and then the other color-coded parts that match. So we're only going to do the first part of this today, and then we'll do the next part of it in the next video. Also important here are the key words, and there's something that you couldn't catch unless you know the Hebrew, so I wanted to point that out here. Is the Hebrew word for swear, shub here, is the same as the word for seven if you don't put the vowels in. And I have Sheba here to highlight that Beersheba also means seven, well of seven. But the word for swear is the same visually, and of course, as I've been noting throughout the whole series on Genesis and on Samuel, the original Hebrew didn't have vowels, and the printed text of the manuscript we have of Genesis doesn't have vowels. So the word for swear and the word for seven look identical, and so I've highlighted that as one key word throughout. And it will make sense because swear is first used here, and the combination of words we're seeing are only here in Genesis, so they're really meant to be connected together, as we'll see. So I'll leave that up as we begin to go through elements of our picture here. So at that time, and as many scholars have noted, that links what follows, as my note below says, to the expulsion of Hagar Ishmael as part of this unit. And many scholars have noted that specific language here, Vayehi Ba'ef, literally is trying to say this incident is happening at the same time as the other one. Now, plainly, it can't happen simultaneously. Abraham can't be dealing with Abimelech at the same time that he's dealing with Hagar. But it's to say we should, as readers and listeners, think of these as simultaneous. Keep the image of Hagar and Ishmael and the sending out and the question of why they were sent out, namely Sarah's preference for her son Isaac, as we look at the story that seems to have nothing to do with the children or the wives. So at that time, Abimelech, who we've seen before, last at 2080, with Phicol, the commander of his army, and I see no reason for him to be here other than structurally, which is to say that when we look at the chiasm, he helps us create a chiasm there, although it would be a chiasm without that. But more specifically, it links us to 26:26. Let's go ahead to that, where Isaac is facing Abimelech around a wife-sister story and around wells, as we'll see, and around the question of an oath and covenant. So the connection of Phicol here with Phicol there will be a reminder for readers to read that story in light of these stories, which is to say, not just as the third wife-sister story that I put up at the beginning, the chart of those three, but the combined elements that are here with Abimelech and the question of a child and other elements that we'll see when we get to chapter 26. So Abimelech, with Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, and notice this is seemingly coming out of nowhere. We don't know where this scene is taking place or what initiates it. And yet again, and there's no provision of hospitality or anything to provide a sense of their companions or anything. It's simply he comes and makes it a demand, as we'll see. So his preface for the demand is, God is with you in all that you do. Westerman notes and argues in my note below, there's no basis for this here in contrast with 26:12 to 14. But other scholars more recently, as I've been noting, see this as continued from 12:18, and the basis is the healing of the king's household, which is to say that was the last thing that happened, that in the dream where God appeared to Abimelech, Abimelech was told that Abraham was a prophet and would pray for Abimelech and his family, and he did, and that led to the healing not only of Abimelech, but of all the wombs amongst his people. So with that in mind, and with whatever time period we imagine has passed between that and this, he's continuing, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, and notice it's a command here. It's not an invitation to anything mutual, although later it'll become a covenant, but not based on this first part, as we'll see. Now, therefore, swear to me, first here, but 19 times in Genesis, sometimes translated as swear an oath, which it will be later in our this passage here. And I've already noted the wordplay. Swear to me here, henna, not hine, which is the word for behold or look, suddenly at something, but only 6:2 and 15:16 previously, and only in this scene, and then in 33:6 outside the Joseph story. So it's highlighting not necessarily a geographic place, but the moment, like here and now, we might say. And we already have the now, therefore. So now, therefore, swear to me now, by God, that you will not deal falsely with me. And I need to note that even though the New RSV has the word deal 3 times or dealt in this verse, it's all different words in Hebrew. So that's not a key word. That's just a coincidence in English. So we have to look at each one of those. Deal falsely, shakir here, is only here in Genesis and only here in the Hebrew scripture in the qual stem. But it's found in these other places, and it's one of the important links with Samuel, and we can look at that one now. The glory of Israel will not recant or change his mind, for he is not immortal that he should change his mind. And so that has to do with the question of changing here or being false. And so we see that link there. But there are some other important links with the Samuel and David story, as we'll see. So don't deal falsely with me. And in Leviticus, it's a matter of like the commandments. It's not one of the 10 commandments, but it's echoing that same theme. Or with my offspring or my posterity. And we really need to stop here because the words are together, only used together, and they're only used together here and in Isaiah and Job, which suggests it's a hendiadys, which is to say 2 words put together that form a single concept. And most scholars see that as meaning posterity. As Sarna notes, literally son and grandson, although not the usual word for son, which is ben, B-E-N in English, or grandson, which is related to that, and they are rare words. There are sons we've seen all over the place, but we haven't seen this word, nin, ben neked. So he could be right. It simply could mean posterity or forever. But as Hepner notes, it could be taken first as a reference to Isaac as Abimelech's son, something that we've seen as a theme throughout this. And if you haven't watched the previous videos, I really encourage you to do that. I don't want to go back and make the entire argument again, but just to fill in a couple of elements of it, we know that God protected Abimelech from having sex with Sarah, and so he didn't touch her. But when he talks to Abraham, Abraham didn't know about the dream and didn't know that Abimelech didn't have sex with Sarah, and we have no specific reason to know that Sarah told him that. And so as Abimelech's talking to him, Abraham may well believe that Abimelech had sex with his wife, and when he tells him, "You've brought this guilt upon me," which is a term that means adultery, and with no uncertain terms, he's certainly suggesting he did have sex with Sarah, even though we know that he didn't. And so he continues to play that out here, and as Hepner's suggesting, we can take this literally as, do not deal falsely with my son or with my grandson, and my son meaning Isaac. But of course he wouldn't say that there. As I have dealt with chesed with you, or literally made loyalty with you. And we heard that in 2013. Let's go back to that for a moment, where Abraham uses it for what he told Sarah to say. This is the chesed that you must do to me. And so as Sarah was put in the position of doing hesed for Abraham, now Abimelech's putting Abraham in the position of doing hesed for him. And so as Abimelech, has done hesed for Abraham, he says, you will deal with me and with the land where you have resided as an alien. And that's bringing in a couple interesting things here at the end of the verse. Why the land? Well, we'll see the land has to do with the wells that come up. And since he's bringing up the land here, that suggests something other than the simple nature of what he says here. I do not know who has done this, and I've not heard of it until today. Why else would he be bringing up the land if there wasn't a question about it that will arise immediately? But where you have resided as an alien, a ger here, related to Hagar, of course. It's framing backwards with 20 verse 1. Let's look back at that. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the region of Negev, etc., while residing in Gerar as an alien. So it frames in verse 20, chapter 20, verse 1, and in 21:34 at the very end. In other words, it frames the two chapters that Abraham is a resident alien. He's a sojourner. He's a refugee. He's an immigrant in this land. And so he's in the same position to Abimelech as Lot was to the people of Sodom. They certainly didn't receive him very well, but Abimelech is receiving Abraham very well, other than he's not providing any hospitality for him. But given this demand, Abraham simply says in one word, or two words rather, Anoki Shavea, I swear it. Anoki being the formal first person singular, highlighting the formality of his agreement here. As Wenham suggests, the succinctness of Abraham's response raises questions that the unfolding narrative will resolve. Because it seems plainly that both parties know something about what's going to follow, even though Abimelech seems to deny it. That this swearing you'll deal well with me is a prelude to the controversy over the well. And many scholars agree with that. So here in verse 25, we see in Westerman's older view as a source theory, it generates nonsense. So we're just going to ignore that and just read it as a continuous narrative, structured the way it is. When Abraham complained, using the word yechak here, which is a technical term for judging or appointing, and we'll see it again in chapter 24 and also in chapter 31. As Wenham notes, it can mean berated, used to reprove, suggesting the bringing up of previous violations. What previous violations would Abraham have to bring up to Abimelech? And notice that Abraham and Abimelech are treating each other as equals, even though Abimelech is a king and Abraham is a homeless wanderer. He's wealthy, we know that, but he controls no land or no people other than however many male and female slaves he's gained from the time in Egypt and from Abimelech himself. But he's certainly not a monarch, and so there's no particular reason for Abimelech to be deferring to him in this way or to respond to his complaint with such respect, but he does. And the complaint is about a well of water, which is part of the wordplay here, a bir hamaim, that Abimelech's servants had seized. And now we're noting something perhaps that's parallel in our chiastic parallel here. I'll just bring up this with the first scene, because what we saw there was Abimelech's servants are around and seized Sarah. And so we can, as my note below suggests, and I'll just suggest this for now, and we'll play out the details, Sarah is the well. Or at least symbolically so. The word for seized here is to steal with force, and hence explaining Abraham's anger is certainly stronger than the usual word for take when it described taking Sarah earlier. But we know that, as we saw in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, that indoor spaces and things like wells are female spaces. So the tent entrance where Sarah had laughed in chapter 18, and the tents and house where Lot and the angels were surrounded by the people of Sodom. Similarly, wells are vaginal symbols because they have water and they bring forth life. And whether it's this well or the well we'll see where Abraham's servant meets Rebekah, the wife of Isaac, or the well where Jacob himself will meet his wife, Rachel, although he'll have to take Leah along too, or the well in John 4 where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman. Wells are often in the Bible associated with women and associated with fertility of women. So we'll see more of that as we go. So at one level, the stories about the well and control of land and water, and control of this very well will come up in chapter 26, as we'll see, one of the connecting points along with the wife-sister story. But here we see Abimelech's defenses in great detail. So I do not know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. Let's look at the note below. On the third point, King is only found out today, but he might have known before Abraham. And that might be exactly the point, that he found out earlier today. He went to Abraham and made him swear to deal well with him, and then he's ready for his defense. And he didn't know who has done it, and you didn't tell me. But if we think of this as not just about the well, but about Sarah, then how do we hear what Abimelech's saying here? I do not know who has made Sarah pregnant. You did not tell me, and I've not heard about it until today. Um, because does he know about the birth of Isaac? He wasn't apparently there for it, and it didn't take place in that location. So, in the time in which she became pregnant and had that child, all this time has passed by. And that's something, we can note, even though it seems like Abimelech is just taking up where the conversation left off. And not only that, Isaac's been weaned. So it's been several years since this last conversation, but the text makes it seem like it's just a continuous flow. Notice that you did not tell me here exactly as 12:18, echoing Pharaoh around the wife-sister story. So this is still bringing us back to the story in chapter 20 and making that parallel there as well. And so then we see what Abraham does. Notice he doesn't argue, he doesn't defend. We don't hear him out loud. It's only the narrator who told us this. So we've only heard Abraham say, I swear it. But instead, he does an action. He took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, which, of course, is exactly what Abimelech had given him earlier, as sheep and oxen. Now, it doesn't say how many. So is he giving them all back or just some of them back? And the two men made a covenant. And we'll see that Abimelech makes a covenant with Isaac in chapter 26. And this covenant, as we'll see, especially as it continues, has many echoes of the covenant with Jacob and Laban in Genesis 31 to 34. And we'll see in the next video it also has echoes of David and Bathsheba and Uriah, as we already saw in the previous scene. So there'll be a number of elements that suggest that the story is not just about sheep and ewe lambs, but about wives and children. And that's where we'll leave it today and pick it up next time. See you then.